Win or lose, both the Axis and Allied armies produced many men in World War II that went above and beyond the call of duty for their respective countries. Some of these men were the men that put their bodies on the line time and time again in a nationalistic fervor that won them infamy amongst the opposing armies, and others were the men who used their immense skill in combat to simply terrorize enemies from afar. With that being said, in today's front video, we'll be staying true to the channel name and taking a look at 7 men from 7 different countries who greatly impacted the battlefields they fought on. Regardless of how they did this, the men chosen all had an impact on their enemies in one way or another, usually through sheer skill and force of will in combat, as well as propaganda in some cases. Although we all know that such a complex and massive war can't really be distilled down to the individual, this video intends to highlight the men who are on the front lines and aims to simplify their actions in the context of only a battlefield. Please do keep in mind as well that this is a part 1 of a potential 3-part series, so don't stress if your country didn't show up in this video, as there's a high likelihood it'll show up in the next one that will be coming next week. So make sure you turn on the notifications and stay tuned for upcoming videos, and without further ado, let's get into this one. First up, we have Simo Häyhä. This Finnish beast of a sniper will undoubtedly be the most well-known of all the men I list off today, and that is for good reason. During World War II, and more specifically the Winter War against the Russians, Simo, a young Finnish boy from the south of Finland, right near the Russian border, was being trained as a sniper. This unassuming 5-foot-tall man turned out to have quite an eye for detail, and his superiors thus gave him a shot as a marksman in the Finnish army. Not only did he take this shot, but he quite literally shot over 500 Russian men, earning him the infamous nickname of the White Death. Eventually, as a result of being used as a propaganda piece for the Finnish and Russian soldiers being deathly scared of him, Russian high command sent everything after Häyhä, and he often found himself in situations where there were multiple Russian snipers looking for a single movement on Häyhä's behalf. 11 days before the war ended, one of these Russian marksmen got lucky and landed an explosive shot right on Häyhä's jaw. According to the man himself, although badly wounded, he still picked up his rifle and landed himself his final kill of the war, then passing out and being rushed back to hospital. Next up, we have yet another infamous marksman, however this time coming from the other side of the pond in Russia. Ivan SIDORENKO was just another failed art student before he enlisted in the Red Army on a whim. Although first drafted into a mortar unit, SIDORENKO sometimes got bored and wandered off on his own to find German soldiers to kill. He adopted the motto "one shot, one kill," and was so successful in shooting the German soldiers from afar that his Red Army commanders quickly promoted him and gave him underlings to train. Due to his and the men under him's success, Soviet politicians quickly jumped on the bandwagon and manufactured mass propaganda called the Cult of the Sniper, designed to intimidate German forces. And this it did, with German forces throwing everything they could at the men, but to little avail. In 3 years, it was reported that SIDORENKO himself had killed an estimated 400 men, and because he was so valuable to the Soviets, after he became wounded a couple of times, they withdrew him from the front lines and he was instructed to remain a trainer for the new marksmen coming through the ranks. Jack Churchill, otherwise known as Fighting Jack Churchill or Mad Jack, was the man from Britain quoted as saying, "Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed." Although he wasn't ethnically Scottish, Mad Jack obviously enjoyed their culture, and when Wehrmacht soldiers heard the distinctive sound of bagpipes, they knew the seemingly crazy man with the sword and longbow wasn't far away. Churchill was essentially the most brazen soldier the war had ever seen. In addition to having the last recorded longbow kill in history, some of Mad Jack's other exploits included escaping multiple POW camps, surviving multiple close-range explosions, and capturing more than 40 Germans at sword point in just one of his many raids. And these are just to name a few. making him an unforgettable pest that the Germans would never forget. Going back to a more methodical type of soldier on the battlefields of World War II, we have the German tank commander Kurt Knipsel. Although German High Command preferred to use the Panzer ace Michael Wittmann as a source for their propaganda, and Knipsel largely flew under the radar, his impact on enemy armored forces is undisputed, and many historians regard him as the most proficient armored fighter for a good reason. Knipsel, during his stint as a tank commander, claimed 168 tanks destroyed, making him the most successful fighter in armored warfare history to date. Unfortunately for the seasoned tank veteran, his life was tragically cut short just 2 weeks before Germany surrendered, when his outnumbered tank was hit by the Russians and the ammunition within it exploded. He was hit with shrapnel in the head and died 2 hours later in a field hospital. Nicknamed the Killer, Clive Caldwell wasn't necessarily the bad-natured type. He was just really good at what he did, and he didn't like German pilots. Fighting for the Royal Australian Air Force in World War II, Caldwell quickly found his wings in the Curtiss P-40 Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks that were supplied to him. His official score was 28.5 enemy aircraft downed, including an ace in a day, which means he shot down 5 planes in 1 day. Although a remarkable score for any pilot, it still doesn't reflect the presence Caldwell had in North Africa against seasoned German pilots. Due to the fact that Caldwell had witnessed one of his close friends being shot by a German pilot whilst parachuting to the ground, Caldwell adopted an eye for an eye approach, and every German plane he downed or damaged, which was quite a few, he would also shoot down the parachuting pilot, something that angered German pilots greatly, although they could just never seem to catch Caldwell in the end. The only combat soldier in history to receive the revered Victoria's Cross twice, Charles Upham was quite the man, who left quite an impression on both the men he fought with and against. His first Victoria's Cross came from Greece, where he destroyed multiple German machine gun nests single-handedly and then organized his men to help him mount a rescue of wounded Allied soldiers, among other things. And his second one came from Egypt, where in spite of being twice wounded, he managed to destroy an entire truckload of Germans and once again organized the men of his company to stage a final assault on the important ridge of El Roussat. Upham himself destroyed multiple tanks and several machine gun nests before he was wounded again and had to sustain a violent German counterattack. With only 6 survivors, his company eventually succumbed to the Germans after ferocious fighting, where the Germans were more than relieved to be taking him as a prisoner. The last entry for part 1 of this series is the French tank commander Pierre Bellotte. Although it is known that the French got trampled by the German blitzkrieg in World War II, that doesn't take away from the fact that many defenders were still extremely brave and skilled, and Pierre Bellotte is a prime example of this. In May of 1940, at the height of the Wehrmacht's power, Bellotte was stationed to defend the French village of Ston. The village had changed hands numerous times and was the subject of furious fighting on both sides. Bellotte, however, stepped it up a notch when on the 16th of May, he and his 1 tank crew single-handedly broke through the German defensive line and destroyed 13 enemy tanks and 2 enemy gun positions, swinging the momentum for the French army for the time being. His tank ultimately received over 140 hits from enemy tanks and guns. However, miraculously, none managed to penetrate the tank's armor and his crew survived, only to be eventually captured by the German military. Bellotte himself, however, managed to escape his prison and cause more headaches for the Germans by becoming Chief of Staff in the Free French Army, helping to orchestrate D-Day and the French resistance. So guys, that was part 1 of the most influential, feared and known soldiers on the actual battlefield itself. And I want to know your guys' opinions. Do you agree with the 7 I've already listed here? And if your country hasn't been mentioned, let me know in the comments section below which soldier you think deserves this title. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to my Discord. They helped me on the French and the New Zealander because I couldn't really find anybody for that. So shout out to you guys. Thank you so much. And if you want to join them, that link is in the description below. And as a side note, I do post all of my sources there. So if you do want to check out the sources, that is the place to go. Anyways, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching and I hope you learned something new.